Halfland, an ahistorical prehistory. The Battle of Wulfswade. The 165th year of the Common Reckoning brought much trouble to Ulfgrim, the king of the dwarves of the Dark Hills. His eldest son and heir, Ulfkill, launched an assault on Unnascrag and lost his life at the Battle of Greydale. Ingildrifa, the lady of Unnascrag, then marched an army into the Dark Hills and took possession of the mines which provided Ulfgrim with his chief source of income. Meanwhile, Ulfgrim's northern frontier was being menaced by Halfred, the king of the Geitsmark. Faced with Ingildrifa's army on one hand and Halfred's on the other, Ulfgrim agreed peace terms with Ingildrifa. But no sooner had he done so when Halfred descended upon the hill-hold and besieged it. Trapped within the hill-hold, Ulfgrim turned to Ingildrifa for assistance. Ingildrifa had no great love for Ulfgrim, but her family now had assets in the Dark Hills. The peace treaty she had just signed with Ulfgrim passed control of the mines there to Ingildrifa's grandson, Bina. If Halfred took the hill-hold, those assets would be at risk. She therefore marched her army down from the Dark Hills toward the hill-hold with the intention of breaking the siege. As Ingildrifa descended from the Dark Hills, she came to the ford known as Wulfswade, where the road to the hill-hold crossed the small but fast-running river known as the Skratterbeck. Traffic on this road had increased considerably when Ulfkill had increased the output of the mines, and alongside the ford stood a newly raised bridge. As Ingildrifa's army neared this bridge, a hostile army led by Halfred could be seen approaching on the far bank. For, learning that Ingildrifa was advancing on the hill-hold, Halfred had decided to intercept her en route, seeking to eliminate his enemies piecemeal. This seemed preferable to waiting for Ingildrifa to arrive at the hill-hold, and then fighting her and Ulfgrim simultaneously. After all, Halfred's father Harni had done exactly that, and it had cost him his life. Halfred had no desire for his family history to repeat itself. He therefore split his besieging force in two, leaving half encircling the hill-hold, neutralising Ulfgrim, while he led the other half out to deal with Ingildrifa. This force consisted of 300 armoured dwarves. In the van were 150 crossbow dwarves, split between two groups, and behind them marched two groups of shield-bearing spear dwarves. By contrast, Ingildrifa's army was more variegated and less well equipped. At the front marched Fat Mags and his 75 halfling mercenaries, unarmoured and armed with slings and bows. Behind them came the core of the army, 200 dwarves of Unnascrag, unarmoured crossbow dwarves in the front ranks, and armoured dwarves bearing shield and spear behind. Bringing up the rear came Scalfin and 75 dwarves of the Eastland, miscellaneously armoured and bearing a variegated assortment of weaponry. Each seeing the other, both forces pressed on. On Ingildrifa's left flank, her halflings pushed forward, ready to pour slingshot and arrows into any of Halfred's dwarves who attempted to cross the river by bridge or ford. But the halflings had not allowed for Halfred's crossbow dwarves. A stinging storm of crossbow quarrels tore into the halfling lines, ripping them to shreds. And then the horns of Halfred's host were sounded, and with a great cry Halfred and his spear dwarves advanced between the two groups of screening crossbow dwarves before them, and up to the bridge. Ingildrifa reacted swiftly. Orders were shouted and troops were manoeuvred. Opposite the bridge, the Eastlanders hurried forward to bolster the remnants of the halflings, with Ingeldrifa and her spear dwarfs behind them. Her crossbow dwarves were deployed in extended order out to her right, where they could shoot into Halfred's left flank. And then Ingeldrifa raised her sword and her voice and urged her spear dwarfs forward. Through the Eastlanders and Halflings they marched, heading for the bridge. Halfred's response was immediate. With a great cry, he led a party of his spear dwarfs in a mad charge over the bridge, seeking to cut down Ingeldrifa and win the battle at a stroke. Meanwhile, another party of his spear dwarfs moved to their right, preparing to cross the ford and fall upon Ingeldrifa's flank. Ingeldrifa's spear dwarfs hastily formed a shield wall and lowered their spear points, only just in time. No sooner had they braced themselves when Halfred and his band crashed into them. A fierce but short fight ensued, which ended when Halfred's spear dwarfs broke and ran headlong back over the bridge, leaving Halfred and a small band of his closest retainers behind them. Halfred barely had time to curse the cowardice of his craven spear dwarfs before he found himself encircled by a ring of spear points, fighting desperately for his life. But Halfred still had hope. To his right, his second party of spear dwarfs were now wading across the ford, coming to his aid, and those of his crossbow dwarfs that had started the battle on his right flank were now moving across to join those on his left, combining their forces against Ingeldrifa's opposing crossbow dwarfs on the far bank. But hope was soon dashed. Bina had observed Halfred's reinforcing crossbow dwarfs moving into position, and even as they did so, they were struck by volley after volley of well-directed crossbow bolts, thinning their numbers and disordering their ranks. And as Halfred's second wave of spear dwarfs reached the far bank of the ford, they saw the last of Halfred's retainers being cut down, and then their king, fighting to the last, falling, overwhelmed by weight of numbers, slain by the spear dwarfs of Unna's Crag. Thus it was that Halfred died, a hero's death. His army was not so heroic. His spear dwarfs did not attempt to avenge their lord or recover his corpse. They panicked, splashing back across the ford and fleeing from the field. His crossbow dwarfs were made of sterner stuff. Although shaken by the torrents of bolts that their adversaries over the Skratterbeck continued to direct upon them, they did not break, but fell back in good order, covering the retreat and deterring any pursuit. Thus ended the Battle of Wulfswade.